welcome to the Beckoning Bookshelf. I'm your host, Jeffrey Ashcraft. Since I have just read The Wonderful Wizard of Oz for the first time, I figured I'd learn a little bit more about the changes the movie made. The Wizard of Oz was produced by MGM and released theatrically in 1939, and is of course a film adaptation for L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which was published in 1900. The film was a critical success at the time of its release, receiving positive reviews, earning 6 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, and winning Best Original Score and Best Original Song. However, despite all that success, it was also a financial flop and would not turn a profit until it was re-released theatrically in 1949 and broadcast on television in 1956. Now, the filming of this movie is also rather notorious for its various problems and rumors, but I won't touch on any of those here because I want to focus on the differences between the movie and the book, and why they made the changes they did. Well, first off, while there are plenty of differences, the main plot points are all the same. Dorothy is swept away from Kansas to Oz. She follows the Yellow Brick Road, makes friends along the way. They defeat the Wicked Witch of the West. The wizard is fake, blah, blah, blah. All the key plot points and events from the book are all present in the movie. But like I said, there are also several changes. And I won't cover them all individually because that will take a really, really long time. Instead, I will focus on the 3 main origins behind many of these changes. Firstly, the movie apparently took some inspiration from a 1902 stage musical of The Wizard of Oz, which was also written by L. Frank Baum, and is even more different from the book than the movie is. I mean, for one, it is far more political. I mean, a lot more political. Other changes include Glinda saving Dorothy and her friends from the field of poppies by a snowstorm, and also Dorothy having a last name. Both of these changes were included in the 1939 film. Also, the success of the stage musical, along with the success of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which released 2 years prior in 1937, inspired MGM to make The Wizard of Oz into a musical, because the book doesn't really have any emphasis on music. However, they did not use any of the musical numbers from the 1902 stage musical, even though it did at least partly inspire them to make The Wizard of Oz into a musical. Another reason for deviations from the book was the fact that the movie was being filmed in 3-strip Technicolor, and they really wanted to capitalize on that. They wanted the movie to have vivid colors and for things to pop on the screen. And this is why the Wicked Witch of the West is green, even though she's not green in the book, and the silver slippers were changed to the iconic ruby red. Both of these changes were made to give the movie a more vibrant look, and like I said, to have these things pop on the screen. The last and potentially biggest reason for changes was the producers wanted to make the movie more appealing to a wider audience. They felt that a fairy tale starring a young girl who travels through a fantasy land would not be very well received among adult audiences. In other words, the producers wanted to grab some people who typically do not care for fairy tales. So, they aged up Dorothy, gave her an actual character arc, because she doesn't really have one in the book. They also streamlined the story and gave the Wicked Witch of the West a far greater role. And I mean, speaking of the Wicked Witch of the West, she only shows up in 1 chapter in the book, and she meets her demise in that same chapter, and that chapter is a little over halfway. So her role is very minimal here in this book. So they made her they gave her a far greater role in the movie. And like I said, these changes were made in order to cater to a more adult audience, and to also give the story some more emotional depth. And this is where we get to the biggest and potentially most controversial change. That Dorothy's adventure in Oz was all merely a dream. In the book, Oz is a very real place. And Dorothy is gone so long that Uncle Henry actually builds a new farmhouse. So a new farmhouse is built by the time Dorothy gets back. However, in the movie, it is portrayed that Dorothy merely dreamed it all after being knocked unconscious during the storm. And personally, I don't like this change. I don't like it, but I have never really liked the whole "it was a dream" plot twist in the first place. It feels like a cop-out. That the whole adventure that we just witnessed was rather pointless because there was no stakes. The whole thing was a dream. I feel like I was lied to when it was all a dream at the end. Still, even if I'm not a big fan of that change, I still understand why they made it. And in fact, the various changes to the story make a lot of sense, and in some cases could be viewed as improvements. I mean, if they kept the story as it is in the book, it would pretty much be a less weird Alice in Wonderland. And in the end, they did create a film that many people still know and love nearly 100 years later. So that in and of itself, you gotta say, is a success. Now, one thing that the movie kept from the book and potentially even improved upon that I really enjoyed is the contrast between Kansas and Oz. So, the book describes Kansas as drab, bland, and gray. Everything is gray. However, once Dorothy gets to Oz, everything is colorful and vibrant. The book does this to display and describe the differences between Kansas and Oz. Well, the movie does the same thing by making the scenes in Kansas sepia-toned black and white. And, when Dorothy arrives in Oz, everything is in this vibrant, vivid color. And it is a brilliant way to visually display the contrast that the book describes. And I really like it. Especially the scene where Dorothy walks from the sepia-toned farmhouse into the colorful world of Oz. It is fantastic. It's a great scene. It's a great shot. But also, thinking about this change, it makes me wonder, how does Dorothy know what a rainbow is? I mean, she has a whole musical number about them. But if she sees Kansas in the same way that we see Kansas, how does she know what a rainbow is? I know I'm overthinking this, but just kind of makes you wonder. And I also wonder if it would have been better if the movie ended with Kansas being more colorful than in the beginning. Because like I said, they gave Dorothy more of a character arc in this film. So in the film, she doesn't like Kansas. She wants to go somewhere else. That's what her whole musical number is about. Somewhere over the rainbow. Well, she finally does get to go somewhere else, and she realizes just how good home is. How much she likes home. And it would be very interesting to see once she woke up that home is more colorful than she realized. And that the whole drab grayness of home that we saw in the beginning of the film was all just her perspective. I think that would have been a cool way to visually show her character arc and how Dorothy changed. And I may have been more okay with that, with the it was all a dream ending if they ended it like that. But anyways, that is all I have for you today. Thank you for being here. Have you watched The Wonderful Wizard of Oz? And do you like the changes they made from the book? Have you consumed both forms of the story? Have you read the book and have you watched the movie? And do you like the changes? What changes do you like? What changes do you not like? I hated the fact that it's all a dream. Don't like that at all. But anyways, thank you for being here. Thank you always for being here. You are amazing. Now go find yourself a good book.